Okay, so we were just to refresh your memory, last week we were still in the middle of this disturbing halacha having to do with, dealing with a mumar lahachis, a person who has converted to another faith, a person who's an apikores. So these are all people that the Rav Shulchan Aruch basically says that if you have the ability to kill these people, then you should take that opportunity. And the reason is because below batlu dine nefashos bisman hazeh, because this bottom line is that the whole issue of capital punishment is only no longer relegated to a Sanhedrin. Aval elu misasim b'chol adam b'chol hakodim zoche. But when it comes to these kinds of people who form a thorn in the side of the Jewish people and are a toxic force within our people, so then it is basically every Jew is deputized to take the law into his own hands and to uproot the evil from the midst of the community. Now, and what we had mentioned before is that this is, of course, a very dangerous text, because if it's taken too fundamentally by a fundamentalist, I wouldn't sleep well at night, because I would be worried that someone is going to come and knock me off, because I'm sure I'm an apikoris in somebody's eyes. So anyway, so we've been going through the Imrei Yaakov. We're going to see Ayin, Tes, and Pei, which of course we saw Pei already, but we're going to read it again today. It's a game changer. But just for to be able to say that we're going through it systematically, let's take a look what he says in Ayin Tes. He says, "Horeg, you're allowed to kill a person even nowadays. However, that's not so clear even according to the classical poskim. Kain pasuk harambam b'Shulchan Aruch Yeredeya. This is the halacha that's paskin by the Rambam in the Shulchan Aruch. Aval begilyon Rabbi Akiva Eiger sham kasa b'zelashono. But if you take a look at Rabbi Akiva Eiger's commentary, he writes, "B'tshuvas hara shuva b'beis Yosef Choshen Mishpat simin shin peches kasav the dafka moridim labor." But in a responsum from the Rush, he says that, and the Beis Yosef quotes this Rush, he says the only thing that a Jew would be allowed to do would be to cause someone to go into a pit and, remove the ladder, so to speak. Aval ein memisim osam biyadayim. But you would never allow to actually shed blood. In other words, you can put a person in a position where they will die on their own. That's the most that a person would be allowed to do, even if a person was truly evil and nefarious, right? But you would never be allowed to actively kill them.
I guess, Rabbi, this is Joseph's brother's strategy.
This was Joseph's brother's strategy, exactly. It was the idea of we cannot spill blood on our own. Why should we spill blood? Let us rather place him in the bore, and if he deserves divine protection, Hashem will come to his aid. Okay, but then, and then we, every single Jew is deputized to take the law into his hands when it comes to uprooting evil. And on that, he says, because of Harambam, the Ein Tzarech lo Edim v'lo Hasra v'lo Dayanim, that the Rambam writes that you don't need witnesses, you don't need forewarning, you don't need judges in these kinds of situations. But we're talking about a person who's an apikores, who heresies against the Torah, and he doesn't believe in prophecy, doesn't believe in the oral tradition, doesn't, or has converted to another faith. But anyone who commits this kind of execution has done a great mitzvah, has removed a great stumbling block from within the Jewish community. But it is first necessary, in order to commit this execution, it has to become public that this guy is a heretic. Let's say a guy's a closet heretic, and you have a coffee with him. He sits, in shul every Shabbos, shuckles, learns daf yomi, does all the things that he's supposed to do. But then he tells you privately, "I don't believe in God." And you say to him, "What do you mean you don't believe in God?" Well, I just decided, that there is no God. I've thought about it a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that this whole thing is nonsense. Well, why do you come to daven and daf yomi and all that stuff? I grew up with it. It gives me great comfort. I enjoy the intellectual stimulation. I enjoy the socialization. Uh, but I don't believe in God anymore. So, are you allowed to kill such a person? Boy, I'd have a large hit list, uh, because people do come to me once in a while and share these ideas with me. It's more prevalent than you would think. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm not going to say any more. But yeah, sure.
But it's because they don't believe, or they lost the connection, or what? Because this could happen that sometimes they don't feel that they have connection or whatever.
No, it's not a person who doesn't feel he has a connection. A person who doesn't feel he has a connection still says, "I know there's a God, but I just don't feel connected to him." These are people who, based on their very rational analysis and exploration and listening to very celebrity, famous atheists, who, like Dawkins and Smith and all the talking heads who don't believe in God anymore, basically say that God is a construct of an ancient world that needed some kind of structure to it, and but we know better today. We know better today, and so such a person who's lost his faith, but is not flaunting it, is not liable for the death penalty, right? That person is not there to promote his beliefs. He's sitting in the back of the shul, or he may not be coming to shul at all, and he's not worthy of being put to death. That's for sure. That's for sure the case. And that's the last point of Mikol Makom Be'inan She'it Parsem Shu Kofer. It has to become public. It has to be publicized. It has to be public information that he's a heretic before license would be granted to put him to death. And and it almost sounds so primitive when it's so what are you going to do? You're going to tell him, recant. Do you withdraw your statement that you don't believe in God? We have you on camera. And so if he says, no, I don't recant, then we kill him. I mean, it sounds so, yeah, it doesn't sound like we can do it anymore. So anyway, but the point is that now that we have all of this information, we go now to the Chazon Ish in the 20th century, early to mid 20th century. Because of Chazon Ish, Dinira de'ein din moridin ela bizman shahashkachaso yizbarach geluya. And this is so important. It needs to be underlined and highlighted and expanded. He says this whole halacha does not apply at a time when God's providence is not apparent. This halacha only applies when God's providence is apparent. Now, what does that mean? Kemo bizman shahayu nisim mitzuyim umishamesh bas kol. He says, at a time when people actually saw miracles, or they heard heavenly voices, v'tzadikei hador tachas hashgacha pratis haniris la'in kol, and people could see divine providence protecting the righteous. V'hakofrim az hu b'nelizus miyuchedes v'hatoyas hayetzer letavos v'hevkeros. And therefore, anyone who heresied during a period like that, where it was much more apparent that there was a God, is someone who is really going to a new low in allowing himself to be drawn after his Yetzer Hara. Okay? And at a time like that, historically, where God was so manifest within a social construct, then it was considered to be a remedy to society to eliminate these wicked people who denied divine involvement with mankind. Ki hakol yadu, ki hadachas hador mevi por anos la'olam. And the reason why this was considered to be beneficial for society is because everyone recognized that the presence of apostasy within a community will bring suffering to the community. In other words, people genuinely believed that if we allow this man to fester and his beliefs to fester within our community, God's going to punish us. And people actually not only believed it, but they actually saw it happen. And it would bring pestilence and famine and death to the community. But at a time of disappearance or hiddenness, where people's faith was not as manifest, people's faith was not as strong, because God's providence was not as manifest in the world, then taking a person who doesn't believe, who's a heretic and so forth, is not remedying anything. Ella hosafas apirza. But if anything, it's only adding to the breach in the community. In other words, the whole point of removing a wicked person, a heretic, from the community is in order to elevate the status of the community. But if people in the community in general don't see God in their everyday life, then eliminating this person, putting him in chayrim, or doing worse to him, causing him bodily harm, is only going to degrade people's faith further. People will view this as a violent act that's gratuitous, that doesn't serve any purpose other than religious fundamentalism. And he says, and therefore consider the whole objective in taking any social action of a religious nature is to remedy, is to rectify. So therefore, if that's our whole objective, ein handin noheg b'sha she'ein bo tikun, then this whole halacha does not apply when there's no rectification involved, but instead the opposite occurs. Ve'aleinu lahachazirim ba'avosos ahava, and therefore it is incumbent upon us to return these people with the bonds of love. That's literally what it means, the ropes or the constraints or the restraints of love. Let's try to bring them back by embracing them. And to allow them to stand in the beams of light of divinity in any way that we have the ability to do so. And this is sort of like, this is the preamble to the whole Kiruv movement, is this statement from the Chazon Ish, right? This is sort of like the budding sparks of NCSY, of Eshat Torah, of Or Sameach, is this statement of the Chazon Ish, who basically is telling us that the old ways don't work anymore. The old ways where you removed the evil from your midst, where they put Baruch Spinoza into Cherem, or they, putting into Cherem was not murdering, but it's certainly putting someone into Cherem today doesn't work, right? It doesn't work today. Like even not doing anything violent, but just putting a ban on someone. and saying that this, yeah, but it never works. Like, I mean, putting someone in cherem because he didn't divorce his wife is one thing. Putting someone in cherem because you feel that his ideas are heretical never works. It doesn't work in today's world anymore. It only makes them sell more books. We saw that with Rabbi Slifkin, right? The more that they put his works under a ban, the more books they sold. Yeah. So it's just important to sort of underline this whole Chazon Ish. And really, basically, this demonstrates that this whole halacha does not apply Bisman Hazeh. I mean, Chabad was not the same Chabad before the 20th century, right? There was the concept of outreach really starts in the 20th century. I can't say that Chazon Ish is the only person. Chabad also came to that conclusion around the same time as well. It's not unusual for a movement to have many sources at the same time. There's something called collective consciousness, where many people come to the same conclusion, even if they haven't discussed it with each other. They recognize that there's a new social zeitgeist. There's something new in the air, and it has to be addressed in a different way. And I think that we're on the cusp of that also in the 21st century, because we've come to the realization that even 20th century methods of kiruv don't work anymore, And so, what are we supposed to do? It's going to require a whole new generation of people who really care about Yiddishkeit to come up with the formula. Because right now we're sort of floundering. A lot of our kids are getting lost, to Judaism, and that's that Pew study and so forth. So the question is, so what methods? What becomes clear from this whole discussion is that you have to look at the generation in which you live and come up with a method and an approach that works for your generation. In a prior generation, kill them, pitchforks and torches, right? And in the 20th century, it was bring them closer with the bonds of love. Okay, and that certainly still applies, right? But the fine tuning of what kiruv is, the whole. If you remember from the 80s and 90s, there was the discovery seminars, and the Bible codes. That too is passé. That doesn't work anymore either, right? Because the kids will look up on the internet and say the Bible codes are bogus, right? So you got to come up with something else. And
Rabbi, I'm very involved in this area with Aish Torah and some other sort of endeavors. But one of the things that I've got from Kira professionals, they say that today what really works best is experiences. These kids today, they want experiences. So, I mean, some things could be like, which were traditional, like Shabbos, experience, but they're trying to think outside the box to bring Yiddishkeit into an experiential sort of level.
Yeah, listen, Ron, I'm not smart enough to tell you what's going to work. First of all, I am a bit cynical about kiruv professionals. The term itself, I'm a bit cynical about. I don't know what it means. I don't know what kind of professional training these people have. I mean, it's basically a person who puts up a shingle and says, I'm doing outreach. And I don't know what their credentials are. They haven't earned a degree in kiruv. So I'm a little bit, I mean this with all respect to you, but I'm just a little bit cynical about the term. And I don't know, and it's very possible that's true, that's what works. The more I speak to younger people, the more I get the impression that even I mean, the Shabbos experience is wonderful, and that's probably the best experience. Going to Eretz Yisrael is wonderful, and there are a lot of people who get turned on to Yiddishkeit and become religious as a result of going on Birthright or getting invited for a Shabbos meal, and it's a wonderful thing. But I think that I also have the feeling, and I have the strong conviction that the that there are periods in Jewish history where the winds of society do not allow a Torah message to permeate and seep into the minds and hearts of people of that particular period of time. And sometimes all that's necessary is to wait it out. I think that there are times that are more propitious for getting across a religious message than others. I think that, for example, in the 1950s, people were not receptive to religious messages as much as they were in the 60s and 70s. And then, and it came in waves, right? Like in the 50s and the early 60s, where people were still recovering from the Holocaust and they didn't want to talk about anything, and people were interested in the American dream, and then all of a sudden people starts to become disenchanted with the American dream, and they turn towards different ways of finding meaning in their lives. And that's when in the 70s and the 80s, you had a tremendous movement of back towards religion, especially among the Jewish community. And then that started to wane in the 90s. And we find ourselves now in 2022, and we haven't recovered that wave of inspiration that we had back in the 70s and the 80s. And I just think that a lot of it is due to the times in which we live. And I don't know that there's any particular formula that's going to help. I think we have to wait for a while, and the kids that we've raised are going to have to search within themselves and say, and come to the conclusion that something's missing before the message that the Torah wants to bring to them is going to sink in. So that's my observation. That's my observation for today. Any other comments before we go on? What do you mean?
Places that are successful and there's places that are not successful. I don't know what the answer is either.
Yeah, Moish is saying that there are places that are successful and there are places that are not successful. There are places that are dangerous. Look, I just had a call last week from a gentleman who's in the process of converting, and he's engaged to a Jewish girl, and he's in the process of converting, and his tutor, who was assigned to him, is one of the quote unquote kiruv professional, works full time for a kiruv organization, but these kiruv organizations also have some of them have lost touch, and this tutor was telling him, this guy wanted to read some writings from Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he wanted to go to shuls like the village shul and Shari Shamayim. And the tutor said, no, you can't go to those places. They're not religious enough. And you can't read Rabbi Soloveitchik because he was tainted by, philosophy and things like that. And there's a lot of, there's just a lot, and there's stuff that's just, that's out there that's harmful. And I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, so this is so these are some of the problems, and the endeavor of kiruv has fallen off the radar in many Jewish communities. We're guilty of it in our community. It hasn't become a priority in our community. And it hasn't become a priority in even the more Haredi communities. It's lost its priority. And the reason why it's lost its priority is because people have come to the realization that either it's not working in the same numbers that it used to, or it's not worth it to expose my children to non-religious Jews who are going to negatively impact my Shabbos table and my whole religious experience. And so it's fallen off the map for a lot of people. It's just not even ba b'cheshbon, as they say, anymore. Yeah.
And it's incredible how bad they are because they go to high school and we think we're going to talk about Torah, we're going to talk about Shabbos. They don't talk about anything about that. They talk about God. So basically, you go to the high school and try to convince the kids that there is a God. So
Yeah.
they talk about. So it's basically a very basic level. It's not a
very basic level. Very basic level. And so that's one problem with that your daughter is seeing from NCSY. And there's another problem, and that is who can we get to do the kiruv on the NCSY level? A lot of the high school kids that are usually the advisors, it's very hard to get them to be inspired. It's hard to find inspired Orthodox kids to inspire other kids. So all around, we're facing a religious, we're facing a religious low point on a societal level. I think COVID has done a lot to put a damper on it even further. At COVID. And so we're going to have to figure out, it's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of real deliberation on how to turn this around and create some kind of, I guess you would call religious revival, of not only Jewish community, but religion in general has taken a huge hit. I'm sure in other faiths, they're dealing with this dilemma as well. It's just going to take time. It's going to take time, and I think they are. I think it's across the board. It's Western society. It's Western society as a whole. Yeah. Okay.
Rabbi, another point is, don't you think that we certainly have a responsibility in the Orthodox community, and it's something that may be one of the questions asked of us when we leave this world, about how much of an effort we put into this area, because it's one of the things that's sort of been proven too, is that sort of trying to have these large seminars of trying to bring people together and everything like that may not work anymore, but we all have people in our lives who we are close to that we can have an effect to, and I just don't see really where the effort is being put from many in the Orthodox community to reach out to those people who are close to us to bring something into their lives.
I think your point is well taken, Ron. I think you're 100% right. First of all, in the last 2 years almost, we haven't been able to reach out to anybody, in any meaningful way, and to expose people to have a Shabbos. But it's been the effort of my wife and me to always have people who are not religious at our Shabbos table. Not everyone is interested in that effort. I would say that most Orthodox Jews of all stripes, really people who work hard during the week, are not interested in their Shabbos table becoming another project because they're exhausted, rightfully so. They work hard. They spend time, even the people who work hard and then spend time volunteering for a Jewish community and having a chavrusa or go to a shir, right? They're exhausted on Shabbos and they don't want the extra homework of having to entertain people who they have to focus their energies upon. They'd rather just spend time with their families, or even if they don't have families, they'd rather just have a quiet time and then rest or read and enrich themselves. But I agree with you. I make it my business to try to have people who are the most vulnerable to being pulled away from Yiddishkeit at my Shabbos table. Okay, we'll continue with Sif Yud Aleph tomorrow, Mirz Hashem. Thanks for letting me share. Okay.
It's great.